It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Using a child's relative successes or failures as a measure of whether we are or aren't a good parent is unhelpful and unhealthy, but many of us take that as a signal that our parenting is on the right track.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
Hello, this is John. I can't even speak. Oh gosh, it's a Monday. Welcome to it. Hello.
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 Hello, Johnny.
Wait, why the British accent?
I'm wondering myself.
For you?
No, for you.
Did I do a British accent? Or did I sound ochre?
I think it was a bit of both. I think you might be a little bit confused.
Apologies to all Brits who are listening right now who are hearing Mrs. Happy Families call you ochre. I'm going to throw you under the bus with that one. Hello is what I'm trying to say. Hello. It's a new week. We've got some important things to talk about that are parenting. I'm Dr. Justin Kylie. You're Kylie, my wife, mum to our 6 kids. I'm the founder of happyfamilies.com.au, and this is the Happy Families podcast.
At least you're not confused about everything.
Well, now we're in the swing of things. Don't waste my momentum, otherwise I'll lose where we are. This week, a very special week of episodes. We're going to tackle parenting myths all week long. And I can't wait to get into it. There's so much to talk about here when it comes to myths. On Wednesday, an important interview with James Anderson about the myths around how our minds work with our children. But today, Mrs. Happy Families, what it means to be a good parent. What does it mean to be a good parent? That's what we're going to discuss. And you've got a couple of myths for us to explore and explode as well. Where are we going with this? What's the first one?
Well, I've got being a good mum means to self-sacrifice.
Well, I'd say being a good parent, because dads experience the same kind of pressure. Maybe not the same level of guilt that mums do, but yeah, there's that idea of self-sacrifice means to be a good parent.
And then we're going to talk a little bit about what it means if you're a good parent, you'll put your kids before your spouse.
Before we talk about those two myths, I just had a thought. So I'm going back to Parental Guidance Season 1. For those of you who didn't see it, in the final episode, we brought our finalists together around the fireplace, and they opened up a letter that they'd written themselves before they went on the show. And the letter was really about what they hoped to get out of the show and how they felt about their kids. And I remember as they read the letter, our tiger parents, Kevin and Debbie, looked at one another and they said,
"Am I a good mum?"
Yes, definitely. And I believe both your children will agree with me. They will consider themselves extremely lucky to have a mum like you.
It was such a beautiful, heartfelt moment. Am I a good parent? But I've reflected on that a lot. We take parenting very seriously, not just at Happy Families, but in Western society. We take parenting very, very seriously. And even though we've got decades of parenting science to guide us in our parenting, we really can't prepare ourselves for what parenting will require of us. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, totally.
Like you get behind.
And just when you think it's all over because they move out of home, you realise that it's actually still going.
It's a lifetime thing. Don't scare people.
Still going.
A lot of people are dealing with their 1-year-old right now going, no, don't say that to me. But there's all these messes of daily life. There's so much research that's supposed to guide us, and we want to get things right. Because if we get things right, that means that we've been good parents.
But what's right?
Well, that's exactly what I was going to ask you. What does it mean to get parenting right? And how do we know that we're getting it right and that we're being good at what we do with all of these unexpected moments that try us? Because, frankly, there is so much parenting research to be done. There are so few answers that we really, truly have.
And from experience, just when you think you're getting it right, in the next breath, something goes wrong.
But does that mean that you're not getting it right? Just because the kids aren't playing by the rules, the expectation that you've got in your mind, does that mean you're not getting it right?
It's interesting. I just had a conversation with our eldest the other day. I was kind of having a little bit of a meltdown because we had a few children dealing with different challenges.
So for those of you who are new to the podcast, our eldest is in her 20s. She's been married for a few years now and moved out of home and living her life.
And she just kind of joked with me and she said, "Mum," she said, "I'm looking at my siblings," and she said, "Each one of us has brought a different challenge to the table for you and Dad."
Only one. Only one. Oh, my goodness.
And I kind of reflected on that, and it's like, I just feel like we've worked through this particular challenge and we can't even use what we've learned from there with the next one because it's a totally different challenge. The totally different skill set required to navigate this particular, difficulty that a child's going through.
Last week, when we had that episode about dad rage or parent rage, one of the key themes that we emphasized in that episode was parenting teaches you a lot about yourself. It's going through these challenges with the children where you learn about yourself. And I think that when we consider what it is to be a good parent, we've got our metrics all wrong. We're looking at the wrong thing. Like, do you look at how your child's turning out and use that as a metric? But even if you do, turning out when? Like now? Or turning out in 5 years? Or once they're an adult? Or if they're the ducks of kindy or prep, does that mean that we're nailing it? Or if they're one of the good-looking popular ones, does that mean that we're good parents? Or is it just a question of lucky genes?
It's so interesting when you put it like that, because the reality is I don't look at anyone else, any other relationship to determine whether or not I'm a good person.
Yeah.
Because the reality is each person has the agency to make their own choices regardless of what's going on around them or who's taught them. And yet as a parent, because I am so emotionally invested in this human being's life and their choices, I think that it determines whether or not I've been a good parent or not.
So I wrote something that I want to read to you. I haven't shared this with you before, but I wrote something that highlights what you're saying and goes into it in a little bit more depth. And I've really thought about this a lot. So tell me what you think about this. Here's what I said. Using a child's relative successes or failures in comparison to peers as a measure of whether we are or aren't a good parent is unhelpful and unhealthy. But many of us take that as a signal that our parenting is on the right track, that we're doing well in the parenting stakes. But is how your child turns out even relevant to being a good parent? What if your child has ADHD and in spite of his genius mental ability, he has limited capacity to inhibit his behavior and so doesn't fulfill his academic potential? Oh, and he's clumsy with social situations. You watch from a distance as he stumbles in his efforts to make friends. You know he has a beautiful heart. He's a gorgeous kid. He just can't seem to get it together. Does that mean you're not a good parent? What if you've provided a nurturing environment, built trust, had all of the important conversations, been present, and they experiment with alcohol or other drugs, make morally questionable choices, or drop out of school to pursue their art, even if that art is making YouTube videos or becoming a Twitch streamer? And are you a good parent while your children are young and compliant, but once they're in their teens and making independent choices that conflict with your value system, are you now a bad parent? That idea that we use the measure of our children's character as a reflection on the success that we've had as a parent, or the measure of our children's successes as a reflection of how good we are as a parent, it just doesn't make sense. And that's something that we've got to get past. I think parenting is about us, not the kids. That's why it's called parenting. If it was about the kids, it would be called childrening.
Well, I know as I matured and, kind of became an adult, and people would, constantly tell me that, I had these amazing parents and that, they would be really proud of who I'd become. There was this idea that I was who I was because of what they had done. And I felt like it took away from my own accomplishment.
Or your own development.
And the fact that while I recognise, hands down, I am the person I am today because in part of them.
Their influence, yeah.
But ultimately it comes down to the choices I've made as a result of the things that they've taught me that make me who I am.
That's a great comment. I'm so grateful to my parents for everything that they did for me, but I feel like I'm who I am because of the choices that I've made, building on the foundation of the environment that they created for me and the support that they gave me as a child.
Yeah.
And I reckon most people who will listen to this would say the same thing. Yeah, appreciate my parents, grateful for what they did, but I've made these choices. I've taken myself to the place that I am today, for better or for worse. It's on me, it's not on them. So this is a little bit theoretical. Let's talk about those myths right after the break. Dads are pretty awesome. Just ask me. Today, more dads are more involved with their children's lives than ever before, and research shows that their children are really benefiting from it. But too often, dads don't realise just how vital they really are. In the Dadding Done Right webinar, join me as I examine how dads can be a fantastic support, the ideal role model, and an excellent all-round best dad ever. Check out Dadding Done Right at the Happy Families webshop.
It's the Happy Families podcast, the podcast for the time poor parent who just wants answers now. Really interested where this conversation is going to go.
Well,
today.
I really enjoyed that first part of our conversation just now. Well, it wasn't supposed to go on for that long, but I love where we went. Let's unpack this first myth of being a good parent. What is it?
Being a good parent means to self-sacrifice.
Yeah. Okay, so you've got a few things to say about this as a mum of 6 kids. Where do you want to start?
I think that as a society, it is 100% kind of an expectation that if you want to be a good parent, then you have to actually forego the things that you want in order to put your children first. And I've spent most of my mothering feeling like that was expected of me. At no point have I ever resented making those choices, but as I have matured and come to understand myself a lot more just recently in the last few years, I have recognized that I'm actually a better mum when I am able to take care of myself first. But I didn't understand or recognize that as a young mum. At a time where I probably needed it the most, I was so lacking in knowledge.
Yeah, to some degree, the more you sacrifice your needs for your child,
the less of me there is to go around.
which isn't always true, because sometimes we need to sacrifice our own needs for our children as well. And as a parent, one of the great learning processes we go through is the capacity to discern when we should be and when we shouldn't be. And we make a lot of mistakes with it, but it's a myth. I agree with you. It's a myth that being a good parent means that you sacrifice your needs for your child all the time. There has to be a balance. It's not an all or nothing proposition in either direction. No. You can't constantly sacrifice your child's needs because you have needs. We know, well, that's called neglectful parenting, and we know how kids raised in those environments tend to turn out. And it's not usually to their benefit at all. But we also know what happens when a parent, particularly a mum, sacrifices everything for the child. She becomes exhausted and burnt out and stressed and can't actually give. It's like that whole thing. You can't fill from an empty bucket, an empty tank, whatever it is. I can't remember the metaphor.
I had a jug in my head, but it's not a jug.
Cup, tank, jug, whatever
It's
it
a
is.
cup.
It's a cup. Yeah, okay. So that's the first one. And I don't know that there's a whole lot more that we need to emphasize there, other than that if you're a parent, there's got to be some way for you to be able to look after yourself. And when I say look after yourself, that doesn't mean vegging out in front of Netflix until all hours of the night because you need some peace and quiet and you just want to go brain dead. Get some sleep instead. That's better looking after yourself than staring at Netflix.
For me, the best thing that I have done to take care of myself is actually giving myself a small amount of time where I can actually have space, like literally just space, go for a walk.
Yep.
So that
Outside,
mm-hmm. I'm in nature and I just have the capacity to have my own thoughts.
What was the second myth that you wanted to discuss today?
That being a good parent means putting your kids before your spouse.
Oh, yeah, right. Okay. Bad idea.
This is a really tricky one, especially when you've got young kids, because the reality is there are significant needs. If you're breastfeeding a baby, or if you've got a really clingy toddler, or as the children get a little bit older, they're not old enough to kind of have a sleepover with grandma yet, but you still want to be able to spend time. And then on top of all of that, as a parent, you're exhausted. And so making time for each other can be really, really challenging. And I remember in our early years of marriage, we were just so besotted with each other. And while we didn't have the capacity to kind of go on dates and stuff, we actually didn't see a real need for it because we just lapped up any time we got together, even though it was very limited.
I'm going to put this out there and say it really bluntly, and I know that this may mean that I'm treading on some people's toes, so I want to say it as sensitively as I can while still being kind of really direct and blunt, and that is that without a strong marriage and a loving home, the likelihood of everybody in the family failing to thrive or struggling goes up. So from my perspective and from a research base, looking at the data, you're putting your children I think, at risk. You're putting your marriage at risk. You're putting everything at risk if your spouse is not, or your partner is not, your number one priority. In fact, just the other day, I was sitting in the living room, tapping away on the computer, doing some work, and Emily came in and said, "Dad, do you love Mum more than me?" And I looked at her and I said, "Emily, I love you so very much, but Mummy always comes first. Mummy matters more than any of you kids because Mummy's my wife, and I love you and I'll do anything for you, but Mum gets my hugs first." And she kind of looked at me and said, "Okay." Like, she was totally fine with it. She wasn't upset by it. She wasn't offended by it. In some ways, I think she was reassured. The foundation on which our family rests is you and I. It's not your relationship with the kids or my relationship with the kids.
I wonder if she had that conversation with you, because the other night when I went to pick you up from the airport after you'd been away, the kids volunteered. There's 2 drivers in the house and they both volunteered, and they said, "Oh, I'll go get Dad." And I said, "No." I said, "I'll go get him." And they kind of looked at me and they went, "Yeah, because you're his favourite." And I wonder if she's kind of just been mulling over that.
Maybe.
And wanted to know.
Yeah. There's a really strong cultural bias, I think, towards favouring and prioritising the needs of children over parents. But whether it's going on a date night or just giving the kids the remote control to the TV and saying, "You can watch a movie for the next hour and a half. We're having some time together in the bedroom." We don't have to tell them why we're having some time together in the bedroom. We just have some time together in the bedroom and give them the remote. And I'm not saying that's what you and I do. I'm just suggesting that people could do that. I don't want to go sharing the family secrets or anything. But doing things that demonstrate that you can prioritise your relationship over and above the remainder of the family relationships, I think, is critically important. I haven't seen any evidence anywhere that would make me question whether that matters or not. So there's 2 myths that I think that we can fairly soundly dispute, throw out the window. The first one, that you should sacrifice your own needs for your children. You've got to make sure that there's a healthy balance there. Kids do have needs and they do need to be met, but you've got to make sure that you're...
Well, the reality is, though, I think I need to debunk that myth. There is never a balance.
Yeah, okay.
You're never going to get the balance right. Mm-hmm. And the reality is your kids are going to take the lion's share. That's family life.
True. Yep.
But as a parent, finding some time to just feed your soul, whatever that looks like, is really important. And for different people, it'll be different things.
Okay. And the second myth is that the kids need to come first. I would argue otherwise.
100%.
It's about your spouse or partner first.
And again, it'll be different for everyone how you find time for each other.
You're my favourite, Mrs. Happy Families.
Well, you're mine.
Okay. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. Hey, what myths are we going to bust tomorrow?
Well, we're going to look at why we shouldn't be friends with our kids. And you can tell a good parent by how good their kids are.
Great stuff. Can't wait. Tomorrow on the Happy Families podcast, please join us there. If you'd like more information about the stuff we're talking about, visit us at happyfamilies.com.au.